Hello and welcome back to the Inner Sense channel. Today we are thrilled to have Moheb Costandi join us. Moheb is a developmental and molecular neurobiologist turned freelance science writer. He's author of the book Bodily Awareness, which explores the fascinating relationship between our body and our self-consciousness. Moheb's work covers a range of topics, but today we'll be discussing the research behind his book, which delves into the critical role that body awareness plays, including interoception, in shaping our perception of ourselves. Moheb uses examples such as phantom limbs and rubber hand illusions to demonstrate the profound impact that our bodily experiences have on our sense of self. I'm so excited to learn more from Moheb about this intriguing topic. Please remember to subscribe to the Inner Sense channel for more of the latest insights on body awareness and how you can use interoceptive awareness to improve your well-being. Good afternoon, Mo. Thank you so much for joining us on the Inner Sense channel.
Hello, thanks for inviting me on.
So I'm really excited to talk to you today and to discuss your book, Bodily Awareness. And it's on a topic which is not only of interest to this channel, the Inner Sense channel, interoception, but one that more broadly I'm very much interested in, which is how we are conscious at all, or why we're conscious at all, and what role the body has to do with that. But before we go into that topic, could we start, please, with a little bit about your background and career journey and how that led you to become a science writer?
Well, I became a writer by accident, really. I started off training as a neuroscientist. I studied neuroscience at UCL, went straight on to a PhD in developmental neurobiology at King's. I spent 2 years on the PhD, but wasn't very motivated and left without completing it, and ended up working as a security guard, which involved lots of long shifts with very little actual work to do. And I set up and started writing a neuroscience blog. That was way back in 2006. And one thing led to another, and that's where the writing started. The blog, the audience for the blog grew. I started getting occasional emails from magazine editors, and that's it, really.
Great. So and your writing topic, is it always on neuroscience, or do you cover other fields of science?
I write almost exclusively about neuroscience, most aspects of neuroscience, but I do occasionally write about other life sciences, microbiology, or but mostly neuroscience. I'd say 90% plus of my work is about some aspect of neuroscience and brain research.
And your new book, Bodily Awareness, what inspired you to write this book, which is about self-consciousness? So yeah, if you could share why you chose that topic, and then maybe a couple of the things that have surprised you most whilst you were researching for the book.
Well, again, that goes back to when I was blogging a lot. 12 or 13 years ago, I wrote a series of blog posts about subjects that I thought were very interesting, and later on it occurred to me that there's a common underlying theme to these posts that I had written, and that is how we perceive our bodies, or body image, if you like. So I wrote one blog post about people who want to amputate perfectly healthy limbs, and they suffer from this bizarre and apparently extremely rare condition called body identity integrity disorder. And I wrote something about that, and about a brain imaging study of stroke patients who experienced supernumerary phantom limbs. So they experience this vivid sensation that there's a third arm growing out from their elbow. And another post I remember was about pain, how altering how we perceive our bodies can alter our perception of pain. And this was a study from an Australian group which showed that when the study participants looked at an injury through a pair of binoculars, that made them experience more pain. But if they flipped the binoculars around so that that their body part and an injury site looks smaller than it actually is, that reduced the amount of pain that they felt from that injury. So I wrote a series of blog posts about these research papers that I found particularly interesting, and then I realized that actually they all have a common underlying theme, and that is the body image, or how we perceive our bodies. So I started digging around, and I found lots more interesting stuff related to this idea, and eventually thought that this is fantastic material for a book.
Fascinating. And you've shared some examples there that kind of make it, it feels like we experience our body how it actually is, and that's a sort of a static thing, that it's, I touch my arm, and that's where my arm is, and therefore how I experience my body is how I experience something like a table. It's all very based on solid physical things, but those examples that you share, when people's perceptions are not functioning in the way that we expect them to, show that it's there are many different ways of experiencing our body. Now, I love that example of the binoculars, because it's such a low-tech, simple intervention. I am aware of some similar studies that have used VR. When you said binoculars, I was thinking you were going to say VR binoculars, but which are more high-tech. And you can see how you can sort of be tricking the body, but the binoculars it's a very low-tech, simple thing. It's literally just perturbing how close or far away something seems to be, and that can influence pain. So really fascinating stuff.
Sorry, the second part of your question, I didn't explicitly answer it, but I think for me, the most surprising and interesting of all the subjects that I covered in the book is this condition, BIID, where patients want to amputate a perfectly healthy limb. And again, I describe that in terms of perturbation of the maps and models of the body that are constructed in the brain.
Yeah, this that the language that is forming around how we experience the world and how the brain, all this sort of predictive processing idea of how we experience anything is really fascinating. The idea that we have generated a model of the world and then generated the model of our body in the world and the relationship between the two, and that it's not so much about sensing and then reacting. It's more about all this anticipatory or forecasting what we think is going to happen. So I see that as a sort of a big trend within the scientific world, and hopefully that as a therapist, I see it can be really helpful for people to understand that concept. If they are in a situation, the example you gave of wanting to amputate is very extreme, but I see sort of people who are in pain sometimes, or emotional stress, that just knowing that sometimes the way I perceive something might be a guess or an estimation of what's happening, and then that opens up the possibility of, okay, can we update these predictions and maybe make them more helpful? So great. The premise of your book is that bodily awareness is actually fundamental to self-consciousness. It's not just part of being aware of my body, isn't just part of the things my sort of sphere of consciousness. It's actually fundamental to it. So to try and understand what that means, can we start with some of the definitions that you have referred to in your book, and then think about how they might fit together to support this kind of claim, I suppose. So you've got a few different terms which I see in the book, and I've heard other neuroscientists use. So one is sort of body ownership. And then we have agency, this idea of agency as a conscious agent, and then self-consciousness. So what do those things mean before we sort of tie them together?
Well, body ownership refers to the sense that your body belongs to you, and that sounds like a very trivial question, but actually there are very complex brain mechanisms underlying the sense of body ownership. And there's a very well-known and very simple experiment called the rubber hand illusion, published in 1998 by Botvinnik and Cohen, which shows how fragile our sense of body ownership is. And so if you imagine sitting at a table with one hand, you say your left hand out of sight on your knee, and your right hand on the tabletop in front of you, and there's a fake rubber hand on the tabletop in the place where your left hand might be. And then if I come along with 2 paintbrushes and I synchronously stroke your left hand and the rubber hand, so I stroke them with the paintbrushes in exactly the same way and at the same time.
So the left hand's the one under the table on the knee.
The left hand's out of view. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a discrepancy between what you feel and what you see. You feel your the fingers, or you feel your left hand being stroked under the table, but you see the rubber hand being stroked in exactly the same way on the tabletop in front of you. And in about 2/3 of people, that very simple manipulation is enough to basically trick the brain, trick you into thinking that the sensations you're feeling in your real hand hidden under the table are actually originating from the rubber hand. So most researchers think of this as, and then if I attack the rubber hand with a hammer or a knife, we can measure physiological responses in you: increased heart rate, a higher galvanic skin response, which suggests that you think your own body is being attacked. So most researchers interpret this as meaning basically your brain is taking ownership of the rubber hand and incorporating it into its maps and models of the body. Now, during the illusion, something very strange is happening to the real hand. The temperature in your real hand drops by fractions of a degree. The hand becomes less sensitive to pain, and histamine reactivity in the hand increases. So it's as if the brain is treating your real hand like a foreign object. It's disowning that body part and adopting the rubber hand in its place. And
so that's before it's been hit by the hammer, is it? Before it knows it's going to be hit by the hammer, it starts that process?
Yes. And
okay.
So this illusion shows that first of all, the sense of body ownership is quite fragile and can be easily manipulated or distorted, and also confirms that the sense of body ownership is based on a process of multi-sensory integration, whereby the brain combines visual information, touch information, and proprioceptive or muscle sense information, and this is an ongoing process, and our sense of body ownership is relies largely on the integration of this continuous influx of different streams of sensory information from the different modalities.
I guess that happens sorry to interrupt. It's just that process, as you said, it's ongoing. And do you know how long they do the stroking before they hit with the hammer on average? Is it sort of minutes or?
Well, yeah, often within a matter of minutes, this synchronous stroking will induce this illusion, and then when you ask the subject to close their eyes, and more often it's done with the real hand and the rubber hand side by side, separated by a screen, and typically the researcher later on, immediately after the illusion or during the illusion, will ask the participant to close their eyes and point to where they think their hand is, and more often than not, they will point to towards the location of the rubber hand rather than their real hand, which is maybe a foot further away to the left. So that's evidence that their muscle sense, their proprioception, proprioceptive inputs from the hand have been altered
by what they saw before they closed their eyes.
Well, and what
they felt.
What they felt. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. How quickly that happens then. And because you may think that, if I carried a rubber arm around with me for a few days or weeks, it might sort of become this long-term habitual thing. But for that, all those changes to happen so quickly, it's quite staggering.
Yeah. And so the ownership is one component of bodily awareness, and the other one, as you said, is agency, and that's defined as the sense that we are in control of our bodies and are responsible for its actions. And again, there are very complex brain mechanisms underlying this sense of agency. One idea is that the brain may actually distort time to enhance the sense of agency. So if you imagine the act of flicking a light switch, when you flick a light switch, you feel the material of the switch on your fingertip, you hear a click, and then the light goes on. And these are all very closely associated with each other. If you flicked a light switch and the light didn't come on almost immediately, but 5 or 10 seconds later, you would begin to doubt whether your actions were actually responsible for the outcome, which is the light coming on. So there's
or the other way around. If it came on before
exactly
before you press the switch,
exactly.
that'd be scary. Yeah.
So there's a handful of experiments suggest that what's actually happening in the brain is a process called intentional binding, in which your perception of the time at which you performed an action and the timing of its consequences are pulled closer together, so that the action and the consequence seem closer together in time, and that enhances your sense of agency. So if you can manipulate it under laboratory conditions, you can manipulate the interval between an action and its sensory consequences. And if you do that, you reduce a sense of agency. So there is evidence that the brain actually pulls the action and the perception of its consequences closer together in time, in order to enhance your sense of agency. And we know that ownership and agency are closely related to each other, but they're distinct. So we see what psychologists call a double dissociation, where you can disturb one and leave the other intact. So in another rare condition that can be experienced as a result of a stroke, it's alien hand syndrome, where the patient will say that one of their limbs has taken on a mind of their own, and it's performing its actions are being performed out. They're not responsible for its actions, so they deny that they're in control of the limb, but yet they don't say that. They say the limb belongs to them, but they deny that they're in control of its actions.
Right.
Whereas another condition called Parasomatoparaphrenia involves a delusional belief that one's limb doesn't belong to them, but it belongs to somebody else, and yet they're in full control of the limb. They just deny that it belongs to them. So in alien hand syndrome, agency is disturbed, but ownership remains intact. And in somatoparaphrenia, ownership is disturbed, but agency remains intact. We still know very little about how ownership and agency interact with one another, but we do know that they do interact. For example, in rubber hand type experiments in virtual reality environments, for example, the greater the sense of agency one has over, say, a virtual body part, the greater is their sense of ownership over it. And knowing that, and having and our increasing knowledge of the processes of multisensory integration are already being used, for example, to aid the development of next generation artificial limbs. For example, it's informing researchers how to develop prostheses that not only that become more fully incorporated into the body image, and for increasing a user's sense of ownership over a prosthetic limb will make it easier for them to control, and the better able that they are to control a prosthetic limb, the greater their sense of ownership will be over it. So there's an interaction there, but we still don't know any of the fine details of how ownership and agency interact.
Wow. The point about the prosthetics, that's really fascinating. And, you know, you can see how far we've come since, I don't know, just a wooden leg, for example, and you see all these amazing robotic things, but to be able to enhance the sensation that it's part of a person's body is an incredible leap, or it will be an incredible leap. As you were talking about that, it was making me think about some of these subtle sort of examples that people might encounter day to day where these things have been perturbed. I'm thinking about local anesthetic, with if you've had a tooth procedure and it feels like your lip isn't yours. And then I do manual therapy, so quite often when working around people's shoulder blades, their shoulder will start to twitch, and sometimes even their arm moves, and some therapists call this like myofascial unwinding and all these terms. But it's interesting hearing how the patients talk about it, because some of them will, they'll feel this movement, but it doesn't feel like they're generating it. But if you ask them to stop it, they can override it. They can make their arm still again. But then when they talk about the movement as an like an external entity. So they say, oh, it's moving down my arm, so it's my lower forearm now, rather than around the shoulder. So it's like, this partial, is it me, isn't it me, in terms of the agency, control. So yeah, really, it's some of these, it's interesting how much of this illusion we take as for granted, and how many these special examples we think are really bizarre, but actually this illusion is happening all the time.
Well, I think most of these, all of these processes are almost always happening way outside of our conscious awareness, but we become very aware of them when something out of the ordinary happens, and I think that's also true of it's very true for most aspects of bodily awareness and self-consciousness. It's mostly happening behind the scenes, but we become aware or even hyper aware of something when we need to. So pain is a very good example. If you suffer any kind of injury, you immediately become very, very aware of the body part that's injured. Your attention is immediately drawn to it, and of course that serves a very important evolutionary purpose to alert us to something that could be life threatening. So certain pain conditions, you've probably heard people say, oh, I pulled this muscle that I didn't even know I had, and so pain is a great a very good example of how our attention can suddenly be focused very strongly on a very specific part of the body, which we may never have paid the slightest bit of attention to in the past.
Yeah, that's bringing to mind the work. I've interviewed two people who focus on chronic pain on this channel. One is Monty Lyman, who's a British GP and science writer, and the other one is Yoni Ashar, who studies chronic pain. And Monty has got this phrase: pain is a great protector, but it's not always a great detector of damage. So sometimes we can have pain and there's no tissue damage or cell damage there, and other times you can have all kinds of damage and people don't really feel much pain. But yeah, that's the point about drawing your attention. When pain does draw attention to a body part, we become so all of a sudden we become unconscious of that body part, which is part of our overall self-consciousness. But how would you, in terms of your book and the premise of your book, how would you define self-consciousness in general?
Well, again, it's that's very that's impossible to answer, really. But bodily awareness, ownership, and agency, they constitute what philosophers sometimes call the minimal self. So in my book, I argue that bodily awareness is a core component of self-consciousness, but there's more to self-consciousness than awareness of one's body. So we have the minimal self, or bodily awareness, and then there's also what some philosophers will call the extended self. So on top of your senses of body ownership and agency, you have your personality and your memories. And memories, so these, of course, they're they're higher level, more cognitive processes than mechanisms of bodily awareness, but they're also very important for self-consciousness. Memory in particular, we use memories to create a personal narrative to help us make sense of our lives. And of course, some people's personal narratives are, better rooted in reality than others, of course, but we all construct a personal narrative to make sense of our existence, and memory plays a huge role in that. So bodily awareness is the core, I argue, of self-consciousness, but you have these other layers above it.
Okay, that's a great kind of overview of all the important things that form part of your book and this topic. Before we move on to any sort of more technical stuff, or some of the arguments you're making in the book, do you have any examples of personal practices that you use yourself for focusing on bodily awareness, maybe from sort of wisdom traditions or therapies or things, in some forms of yoga, there's a focus on the body. Do you use any of those?
I do not, because I'm perfectly in tune with my body all the time. No, I don't. That was a joke. I'm not, of course. I'm sure that not many people are. I don't use any particular method myself. I'm very interested in ancient Eastern philosophies. I find Taoism and Buddhism are very useful, and of course meditation is related. I don't meditate myself, but there is evidence that experienced meditators can alter their functional brain connectivity in a way that increases their awareness of interoceptive processes. So meditation is a practice that immediately comes to mind, but I personally don't do anything myself.
Okay. Has any of what you've learned, some of the examples you mentioned or otherwise, has it changed the way you perceive your body or the way that you perceive the world through your body, would you say?
Again, not really. But one thing I think I've taken on board is that maybe sometimes I need to pay less attention to what's going on inside my body. So some people are too aware of their interoceptive signals. Other people aren't very sensitive to their internal signals, and others have difficulty. Well, we all have difficulty interpreting what's going on in the body, but some have much greater difficulty than others. And I think one thing I've taken on board while researching and writing about in interoception is to not pay a huge amount of not put too much emphasis on what's going on in here. It's just a physiological response and isn't indicative of necessarily indicative of something more significant. I think when I was younger, I maybe experienced anxiety every now and then. Maybe I was even a bit of a hypochondriac, but I think paying less attention to my body's physiological responses is I think that's probably the one thing that I've been doing more and more, less and less of.
No, that makes sense. And yeah, I think the Monty Lyman and Yoni Ashar have, especially Yoni Ashar, one of the techniques, they call it somatic tracking, but I guess it's to help people not worry so much about bodily sensations if they are hyper aware. So yes, and on the flip side, where I see, this is me talking personally now, is sometimes in the past I've had a tendency to go on a gut feeling or to react automatically to a bodily sensation, maybe even in an interpersonal communication. And so sometimes in that case, if a bodily reaction is driving my behavior, then it's actually helped me to, for a while, at least for a short while, to actually notice that pattern and then change it slightly and behave differently, or change my beliefs and perceptions. But yeah, that's really, really interesting. That one of the other things I wanted to ask about, I saw that a quote in your book that where you were saying that we had this dualism, the mind-body dualism, that's been around for hundreds of years. Maybe it's often Descartes is blamed for it with his quote, "I think, therefore I am." I don't think it's entirely his fault. There's probably other cultural factors. But you're sort of saying that with modern science, it's been replaced by another dualism, the brain-body dualism. Can you say a little bit about the brain-body dualism and how much you think language and culture shape the way that we experience the world and our bodies in the world?
I think that most researchers today, not just neuroscientists, but also psychiatrists and psychologists, and anyone interested in human behavior, still make a distinction between the brain and the body. Increasingly though, we're seeing that the brain and body are intimately linked, and conditions, psychiatric conditions, depression, anxiety, and others invariably involve bodily symptoms, and I believe that we won't fully understand these conditions until we take the role of the body into account. And doing so will likely help us to develop more effective treatments as well. And so in the George W. Bush, no, one of the Bushes declared the 1990s to be the decade of the brain, right? And from the 90s onwards, there have been major advances. You know, the 90s was when MRI was neuroscientists started to use fMRI widely, you know, and since the decade of the brain, there have been huge advances in technologies available to study the brain, and some advances in our understanding of the brain as well. But one of the consequences of this is that now this idea that you are your brain, we are our brains, has become quite sort of deeply entrenched in the popular imagination. And at the same time, language does play an important role. So doctors use terms like psychosomatic, meaning, you know, your condition, it's something in your mind that has affected your body, or the function of your body. So that's implicit in that word psychosomatic. There's an implicit assumption that the mind and body are separate entities, and even you know, the separation of neuroscience and psychiatry / psychology implies that you've got the brain on one side and the mind on the other. So language and culture do play a big role in this idea that the brain, the mind, or the brain and the body are separate things. But I think it's crucial to recognize that actually they're very closely linked. The brain, of course, is the command center. It controls the body, but the body plays a big role. The body has a major influence on the brain. It has a major influence on our emotions. It plays a big role in our emotions. It can influence our thought processes in subtle but not insignificant ways. And I think the sooner the research community accepts this, the better they'll it'll be really helpful for them to understand how the brain works, to understand a whole host of conditions that we're still struggling to understand and treat.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Thank you for sort of pointing out that kind of bias or emphasis towards elevating the brain above in importance above the body. I mean, if we think about it anatomically, it's nested within the body, and the spinal cord and the nerve, the nerves go out like roots through the body, so they are in communication with all the other systems in the body intimately. And argument, I mean, this is my bias, that the brain is actually in service of the rest of the body. It's actually there to help. I mean, Lisa Feldman Barrett, who I'm sure you're aware of her work, that she's got this idea of this great phrase, body budgeting, which is, I think it's her sort of layman's term of to explain allostasis, in that that our bodies actually need to budget resources and energy into the future, and actually the brain is the
accountant.
The accountant, yeah. So that's it. The accountant, and really that puts it in not a lowly position, but it's actually in service of the rest of the body. And as you said, all the other systems I've got as an equally important role as a kind of a whole team. That's the way I see it. You've got maybe the gut and the microbiome as a department with one responsibility, and that's sending reports to up to the brain, and it's all highly specialized, and as we know,
well, the gut, of course, has a mini brain of its own. I think it I don't know why the figure of 100 million comes to mind, the number of nerve cells in the gut. That might not be. I think, yeah, that seems right to me. So there's a mini brain in the gut, and of course there's the gut microbes. Although I think there's a lot of hype surrounding gut microbes. There is good work being done in that area as well, though.
So I see your book as joining with another group of writers and scientists who've published on this idea of relationship between the consciousness, and emphasizing the importance of the body with that. So a bestseller from a couple of years ago, Anne Seth's book, Being You, is one of them. And then we've got Mark Solms, who wrote The Hidden Spring, which, his idea is that consciousness fundamentally comes through from information fed through the body, through the brainstem. And then Antonio Damasio was one of the sort of pioneers of research on interoception. Would you say that are these you and these small group of researchers are they? How much in a minority are they? Because I'm biased in that I'm drawn to all of this work. Would you say we're getting better as a community as a whole in terms of describing what we mean by consciousness in relation to the body, is it still a very minor field of a pool of people?
Well, first of all, I'm honoured to be included in this illustrious group. I think these ideas aren't entirely new or novel. They've been around for a long time, and yet they still haven't gained wide acceptance. So I would I'd be inclined to say no. These views are still in these. It still is a minority view, I suppose, but I think it's slowly gaining ground. This idea that brain and body are so closely interlinked. But no, it's still not widely accepted, I would suggest.
Okay. And what are you looking forward to working on? Are you working on any more books or articles at the moment this year? And where can people find out more about your work?
I'm well, my Twitter feed, I post all my latest work on there. That's at Mocost, MOCOST. If anyone wants to follow me on Twitter, and my website, neurophilosophy.wordpress.com, includes a page that contains links to most of the articles, news stories, features that I've written over the past 15 years or so. And this year I may start writing a book about the prion diseases, the discovery of the prion protein as an infectious agent that causes conditions like BSE, mad cow disease, variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, scrapie, and my particular favorite, Kuru, which is a human form of mad cow disease transmitted, it's believed, by ritual mortuary cannibalism among the foray peoples of Papua New Guinea.
Wow.
So that's something I'll probably start working on this year, and I'm looking forward to that very much. They're a fascinating group of diseases in themselves, but also because of the fact that they're caused by a misfolded protein. You know, they're infectious diseases, and the infectious agent is a misfolded protein. And these are the just about every communicable or every other communicable disease we know of is caused by some microorganism, a virus, a bacterium, a a fungus or a protozoan or something like that, but the prion diseases are caused and transmitted by a misfolded protein molecule.
Wow, I really look forward to seeing that work unfold. No pun intended. But I had an undergraduate lecturer at Nottingham called, I think his name was Fergus Doherty, and he was I'm scraping the barrels of my memory now, but he studied prions, and at the time it was a student, I found it a tricky subject and interesting, but I didn't realize how obscure it is. That, as you say, it's almost, we think of, in terms of inheriting information, we think of the genetics as the archetypal way of doing that, but the fact that prions can propagate themselves through folding, and they can cause other proteins to misfold, and this can be passed on between organisms is really quite interesting, and maybe it will help to break down another dualism about the self and other as well, there's this idea that actually viruses, for example, is a very fuzzy boundary between self and other, and retroviral DNA can be incorporated into the host genome, and so these boundaries become this body ownership kind of idea and agency do become very fuzzy when you look at examples like this.
Oh, actually, a large proportion of the human genome it consists of endogenous retroviruses that were incorporated into the human genome tens, hundreds of thousands of years ago, or even into the genomes of our ancestors. In fact, one of the most recent things I've written was a short article about the possible roles of human endogenous retroviruses, which are a class of jumping genes in the development of Alzheimer's disease.
Wow. Oh, I'll have to check that out. Because when you say a significant proportion of our genome,
nearly
half, which is more than actually the coding part, because you've got other reasons as well, not just retroviral and genes that code for functional proteins. There's other things as well. So that means that our genome is more retroviral DNA than it is functional coding proteins. Is that correct?
Yeah, probably. It's not my area of expertise, but about 45% of the human genome consists of these retrotransposons, and endogenous retroviruses are one class of these transposons or jumping genes. And of course, the gut microbiome, which we mentioned just now, encodes many times more genes than the human genome itself. So, we're almost more microbial than we are human. We've got bacteria in our guts encoding tens or hundreds of thousands of bacterial genes, and we've got 10% of at least 10% of our own DNA consisting of these ancient retroviruses.
Wow. So that's something to blow our mind and put put our sense of self in its place. Thanks so much for your time. You've been really generous with all of that information, and I'll include links to your blog and Twitter and link to the book in the description for this video. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I hope to speak to you again when you've maybe when you've got the work developed for the prion as well.
Well, thank you very much. The pleasure was all mine, and thanks for your interest in my work.
Thank you very much. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Please remember to subscribe to the In a Sense channel for more information about the role of your bodily sensations and tips for using bodily awareness to improve your well-being.